Hi, it's time for me to work on the Beethoven Archduke Trio. I've played this a number of times, not in the last few years, however, and this will be a new treat for my relatively new cello partner, Mary Peckham, who hasn't played this with us, with my other partner, Julian Ross, and I. So we're looking very much forward to it, and our first rehearsal is in 3 days, so I better get cracking. The first thing I need to discover is what are some of those elements that won't stick. And I should point out that I've been not playing much piano over this Christmas break, so I'm pretty darn cold, haven't played today. Haven't played in a while, as a matter of fact, so I've got to get back in the swing of things. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to look for is a reminder of some of the more challenging parts, because I don't want to just mindlessly go from beginning to end hoping for the best. I want to see what's going on. So I've noticed there's a particular section or moment right at the beginning. The piece starts off this way. And so on. Where it gets a little bit tricky early on is not a big deal if you're an experienced pianist. There is an issue, however. After this trill, this next trill goes to an F major chord. So many of my students have discovered that that sort of thing is potentially rather tricky. It's very similar to what I call the Mozart concerto syndrome, in which you play a scale followed by an octave. And I long ago discovered that it's a waste of effort to combine two different kinds of techniques that don't really belong with one another. In other words, a scale technique and a chord technique or an octave technique, those are rather different. You need to have an open hand and a sense of comfort about how you approach the keyboard when you play one of those octaves or chords. So if you try too hard to just open your hand up at the last moment, the risk is that you've lost the optimization both for the scale and for the chord that follows it. So that by far the simplest process is letting go and reapproaching the keyboard at a moment where the ear is satisfied that there's no huge gap and the gesture at the same time is simple. So in this instance, in the Archduke Trio, there's a little trill that goes to the chord. So you could conceivably use a very fancy and extraordinarily difficult fingering, such as using 4 and 5. But I prefer to use an optimal fingering for the trill itself, 2, 3, and 1 at the end for the Nachschlag, and then toss to the chord. So I've decided I know this well enough, I'm going to go on. Where it gets really challenging, in case some of you haven't used this before, I've become an iPad fan, although I will probably play this piece with the original music. I have much better editions than these old editions. But programs like Fourscore and other ones that allow you to turn pages and allow you to keep major libraries at hand and easy. And for aged eyes, rather easy to see. They make it very easy for me. So I have learned from other scores, and currently the score I've learned from is in my studio at school, where I am not at this point. So I will learn from this score for now. And let's see, measure something or other, I think it's measure 33, is full of these little tricky things. Triplets. No big deal, except for the fact that each one has a little shake on. And so on. I will sound much better than I sounded right then, because the process of swiveling and talking to the camera and trying to play at the same time, I'm discovering is a little bit peculiar. What I will want to find out right away is, what do I need to do to adjust fingerings so that each one of those little turns optimizes the way I feel as I go down. And of course, there can't be a whole lot of resistance, because this passage will be rather quick and I want to be able to play it with a sense of ease. So let's see what happens. Let's see. Well, what is written is, in this edition, is really, really peculiar, so I think I know after trying it once that I'm going to eliminate it. So it's a good thing I can't read those little superscripts well, because they're driving me crazy. So I'm going to try letting just my body answer for me. And of course it repeats a lot, which is a good thing. It goes beyond one octave worth. Oh, here's a fairly sophisticated issue. I like shaking between thumb white note and third finger black note. It's a particularly comfortable thing. If it leaves me with 2 and 3, then I have to go to 2 on B flat. So I would much rather have fourth finger on D. Alas, it's a little uncomfortable to go from 2 to 4. Rather than trying to compress my hand and making that happen, if I do choose to do that, I will rethink what belongs with what. It's a sort of a mental regrouping, which is very similar to the way I think about tongue twisters. So in any event, if I do go to fourth finger, I'll come way out on the white note here to connect the D with the B flat. And immediately the sense of difficulty goes away. The other thing I could do would be to turn to third finger, which would give me my fourth finger already. So how I make those decisions, basically I don't let my mind get too much involved. I try it out those various ways and see which my body responds to more quickly and more naturally. For now, I'm going to stick with the second finger and move a little more. Okay, now, ultimately, that's got to be quite comfortable. So, for a cold pianist, I understand the process, but it's not something that I can just sit down and feel completely comfortable with. So I have to make absolutely sure that I refine what I'm doing so that there's no excess of gesture and there's no excess of thought. It's fine for there to be an excess of thought right now because I need to know that I'm thinking clear thoughts about what works and what doesn't work. But I can't be thinking that hard when I'm executing it. So the point is to analyze it, figure out what needs to be done, experiment with what needs to be done, decide what works, and then drill what works, so I don't have to think about it again, other than just to launch it. So I may talk a little bit less as I work this out. Pardon me, I'm still here. I know you're still there. I should point out, even at this point, a big ledger line, lots of ledger lines are still difficult to read, so since I haven't played this recently, my ear doesn't say, oh, of course. Happens to be an A, which I should have known. The first of these passages starts on B flat. Second one on F. In other words, B flat chord. D chord, that's a little surprising. And then an A7th, okay? So B flat, and so on. So that at least guides my noticing and my thinking, so I don't have to worry about the essence of these notes, that it makes sense, in other words. Second one. I must admit to being amused that because I don't have the advantage of what I've done with this passage before, it feels remarkably new to me. In other words, although I know how it goes and I could hum it, my body is not responding quickly to it. I don't get any of the visual cues of my old fingering, and I'm hashing my way through it as if it were a brand new piece. I will probably, when I get hold of my score, add my fingerings to this particular score so that they're consistent. But for now, it's just sufficient to feel that I'm humbled, rather, by the fact that this is still as challenging as it ever was, unless I have that inside information. So. Yeah, and I'm noticing that such things as the fourth finger there, when I'm wanting to fall down a fourth, that makes my hand particularly comfortable. So I want to make sure that some of my fingering is designed to really predict what the next interval will be. And by choosing the fourth, I get the next interval, the next lower note accurately. And I admit to ignoring the fact that it goes from forte to piano right now. That's less of an issue for me than just finding that comfort zone. So another irritating thing about playing trios is, of course, that sometimes there are passages that are full of notes like this that go by in an instant, and that my partners don't have to deal with. So pianists typically, not always, but typically in piano trios have to spend more preparatory time before rehearsals because there's so much of this clutter or so much of this complexity that actually, as a line or as something that plays a role in the larger context of the piano trio, isn't nearly as important or as involving or as challenging for the ear as it is for the pianist early on. That's one of those shoulder shruggy things. You just put up with it. So I'm starting to feel a certain je ne sais quoi, a certain sense that I'm finding a groove. It's not easy yet. It's much easier than it was before because I'm playing the right notes, which is a good thing. And that my fingerings are starting to respond to the demands. It will have to be much better than that to be at tempo, to be as light as necessary, to be pretty well unself-conscious as it's executed. But I'll show you a little experiment. You notice I'm playing and talking now, which is a good sign for me because it indicates that a lot of the gestural language has become kinesthetic, that I feel my way through the passage and don't have to stare at the score for reference at that point. Because whether or not you're playing for music, you really can't be responding to quick passages in real time. It's just not a possibility for this degree of complexity. You have to be able to incorporate it into a sense of ease. Well, there, I think I can keep myself, there we go, and so on. Not great, but not bad. So, okay. Now Beethoven gets a little tricky because he alternates his intervals somewhat. There's some really compressed position, so I want to make sure my hand stays comfortable. Okay, got to the bottom. I will admit to something very interesting. I'm finding this exhausting. Not that this amount of work is exhausting, but both being aware of it and explaining it and doing it, that creates a level of complexity that doesn't exist when I'm just playing on my own. So some of the time I may be much quieter verbally speaking, just to see what happens when I stop explaining what I'm doing. But for now, suffice to say that it's an interesting process. You should all try it, just to be aware of what your process in fact is, and how it gets altered when it gets observed, as it is now, and whether or not when you're trying to be efficient, it makes you unduly self-conscious about trying to be efficient, or it just allows you to get even more efficient. The jury's still out because we're just starting. So. Here I'm experimenting with fingering. At least in this case, the conflict I was having with myself before, I'm resolving in favor of turning to my third finger, at least for this one. Was I inconsistent? I'll have to go back and find out. Really doesn't matter, because if I change my mind, it's really not so much my mind as my body that's making up my mind for me, if you get my drift. Need the fourth finger for this tritone. Fourth. Lots of fourths there. Third, 3, 4. Now, I tell this to myself, I tell this to my students: if you don't leave breadcrumbs, as it were, you're going to have to keep on doing it. You're going to forget what you did. So a pencil is normally the best tool you can have available when you have a printed score. As it happens, this is not a printed score, so I will have to rely on my capabilities to write electronically. So, draw, pencil, and I write with a red pen. Because this is not my primary score right now, I'm not sure whether these things will stick, and I'm not particularly concerned with being neat. I'm a terrible writer as it is, but I think normally I can read my own numerals. So, third finger here. Fourth finger there. Fourth finger here for sure. And fourth there. Okay. I'm only writing the fourths most of the time because if you have a default fingering, there's no reason to keep repeating yourself. So, 3. This is a mistake. Now it's to turn. Okay. It's actually a fourth finger. So 3 going to 4. keep wanting to play 4 here, but it doesn't work. Interesting that my tendency is to think of this in a different way from what's written. So this rather compact gesture here is unexpected for me, and I've got to get used to being expected. So right now, the interesting thing is all of the times in which I don't anticipate or I do anticipate how I'm going to feel. It stays complicated to the extent to which it's unexpected, and I've got to make it expected. For example, that compact gesture, now that's becoming a compound gesture that I'm more comfortable with because I've reminded myself it's exceptional and unexpected. There I go. So, certainly helps to outline it. A7, and then the G to change the pattern. And then D major again. So, if I were memorizing it, for example, that would be an important part of it. And there's no reason why I can't be practicing it from memory here, just because I might be looking incidentally at the score. In other words, some of the thing, it's a trap I will fall into because I'm a pretty good sight reader. You can't tell right now, but I am. That I might rely too much on the information I get from the score. And if that comes too quickly, it's of no benefit to me. This passage is almost unreadable at tempo. You get basic hints about what's going on, and you launch yourself down each series. But you have to expect the intervallic changes, you have to expect the black notes where they are. So a lot of your preparation is in knowing that the cues, just as cue cards in a speech might be, that the cues are all you're actually thinking about. The cue sets you off on a certain behavior. So if I'm still thinking too much, that's too much. And very often, it's of benefit, even in chamber music, to have memorized something, to know that you fully incorporated a sense of gesture and simplicity and understanding into your work. Otherwise, the risk is always that you feel you have a superficial knowledge of it and that you're forced to hope that you're lucky during performance. So, oops. I should have known better because I know now it's an A7th, right? Let's see, my memory of it, or at least my understanding of it, is improving. I need that third there. I need that compact gesture there for that small interval. Still struggling with deciding whether before those white note fourths I want a third finger on the C sharp or a second. Now, you'll notice that I'm hesitating, but for me those kinds of hesitations are an ultimate aspect of learning well. I call them mental breaths, you can call them what you will. It's the places where I recognize an uncertainty and I need to work out that uncertainty in my mind rather than committing myself to going to something that I can't do well. So, if, for example, here I'm asking myself, is it third or is it second? I'd rather stop silently and say, it's the third, and then play the third, rather than just play one or the other and find out whether it worked. Because I wasn't sure. It's third. Let's go up here. Third. Now I might just tell myself third. Third. Second. Second. Third. Fourth. Third. 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 As you can see, when I think about it, I'm not always sure, but I usually get the right result if I take time enough to ask myself the right question and wait for the answer to come. But I am getting stuck here. Not because it's inherently difficult, but because there's a certain collision of different kinds of stubbornness within me. One that just wants to go for it, and the other one which wants to think clearly about every one. And I put myself on the spot. Second. Okay, so here's the third to the fourth. So what I'm discovering is I keep thinking there's a lot of fours in it, but there isn't a second one until down there, which shouldn't surprise me, because that's an octave below the first one. Now, that kind of discovery, I didn't hold that in the can. In other words, I just discovered that discovery. In other words, it's a silly little thing, and I should have known it before, but it would have made a lot of difference in terms of just being able to say, oh, here's where I do the fourth finger. Now everything else is third. Until the same D sharp E needs my 3-4 combination. That's a nice thing to discover. Here's the first one. Here's the second one. Now there's an extra 4 and I have this tritone. Didn't put that one down. And so on. So didn't listen to myself. 4, a bunch of 3s. So here comes the 4. The 4 going to the tritone. 4 again. Okay, no. Am I going to wait and perfect it? No, right now what I wanted to know is did I have good fingerings? I want to get out of my way now, because the risk is if I become stubborn about wanting to perfect this passage at this point, all of that variety of experiences I had will confront one another. They'll have a little battle within my poor little psyche, and I don't want that. What I want is a sense of a positive energy resulting from this experience. So having struggled my way through it and having found that I have good fingerings and a good sense of gesture that needs to be optimized, I'm going to put it away for a little while and then come back to it. Okay, I'm going to take a break because I need a break, and I think that's an important part of this sort of thing. This is not physically exhausting, I assure you. My left hand hasn't even done anything except for an occasional fun comment. But right now, the combination of being on and of talking to you and of working through this is exhausting, and the best thing you can do when you're practicing efficiently is to note when it would be counterproductive for you to carry on. So I'm going to take a short break and I'll be right back.